Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going on a deep dive, and we're going into the world of the KNPA,
The KMPA.
the Korean National Police Agency.
Wow.
You sent over a Wikipedia article about them, and this is always such a great place to start. I mean, Wikipedia, you can learn so much.
Yeah, it's a great jumping off point.
It is a great jumping off point.
For sure.
I gotta say, just glancing through it, I found some really interesting things.
Like what?
Well, did you know that they have a whole unit just dedicated to tourists?
Interesting.
And they used to have a riot police force.
Oh, wow.
Made up of conscripts.
Really?
Yeah.
That's fascinating.
Yeah. So we're going to go deep on this one.
I'm excited.
Yeah, me too.
Those are some really interesting points that you brought up, actually. And they highlight, I think, a key theme that we see throughout the KNPA's history.
Oh.
It's kind of push and pull between tradition and modernization.
Oh, okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, the KNPA's roots actually go way back to 1919, to a police department that was within the provisional government of the Republic of Korea.
Oh, wow.
And their first commissioner general was Kim Gu,
Right. Kim Gu.
a hugely important figure.
Yeah, I remember reading a bit about him. He was really involved in the Korean independence movement, wasn't he?
Absolutely, he was a symbol of resistance against Japanese rule and was a huge driving force in establishing that provisional government that we talked about.
So even from its very early days, the KNPA was intertwined with this turbulent period in Korean history.
Yeah, a very significant period for sure.
Wow, so we're talking about a police force that was born out of a fight for independence. That's a pretty powerful legacy.
It is a powerful legacy, and it continues to shape the KNPA's identity even today. But as South Korea itself has undergone these massive transformations over the last century, I mean, from Japanese occupation to the Korean War to rapid economic development and democratization, the KNPA has also had to adapt and evolve alongside those changes.
So how did that play out? What were some of those turning points for them?
Well, after World War II and the division of Korea, the KNPA was formed under the U.S. Army military government in Korea, or USMCHIK.
USMGK.
Yeah, and this was a period of significant American influence, as you can imagine, and it really shaped the early structure and practices of the KNPA.
I can imagine the challenge of trying to rebuild a nation's law enforcement system after such a tumultuous period.
Yeah, for sure. And then you have the Korean War, which obviously had a profound impact on every aspect of Korean society. And the KNPA played a crucial role during the war, not just in maintaining order, but assisting with civilian evacuations and even engaging in combat operations.
Wow, so they were right on the front lines.
Yeah, they were. And this period also saw the emergence of some of those specialized units that you mentioned, like the riot police, which was initially formed to address the instability and the potential unrest during the war.
Right, that makes sense. So after the war, what happened?
Well, South Korea then went through this period of authoritarian rule, and the KNPA, unfortunately, was often used as a tool of repression. During this time, they were involved in suppressing protests and silencing dissent. This is a dark chapter for the agency, and one that still casts a shadow on its reputation today.
You mentioned this push and pull between tradition and modernization, and it seems like even as the KNPA was being used for these less than ideal purposes, they were also going through significant structural changes.
Yeah, exactly. Even during this authoritarian period, they went through several iterations, first becoming the Bureau of National Security, then the National Security Headquarters, and finally in 1991, the National Police Agency as we know it today.
Okay, so 1991 is a big year. What was happening in South Korea around this time that might have influenced that change?
Well, 1991 marked the official end of authoritarian rule in South Korea, and the country began its transition to a full-fledged democracy.
Okay.
And this had a major impact on the KNPA. There was a push for police reform, greater transparency, and a shift away from those repressive tactics of the past.
So they were trying to move away from that image of being a tool of the government and become more of a protector of the people.
Exactly, and this was a really pivotal moment in the KNPA's history. They had to reevaluate their role in society and rebuild trust with the public. And this process of reform and modernization is still ongoing today.
So this sets the stage for understanding the KNPA as it exists today.
Precisely so. Before we dive deeper into specific aspects of the KNPA's work, maybe we should take a closer look at how it's structured and organized. You mentioned it has a multi-layered pyramid structure.
Yeah, that's right. According to the Wikipedia article, there are 18 local police agencies, all reporting to the KNPA headquarters.
That's correct. But it's not a simple top-down hierarchy. Those local agencies have a certain degree of autonomy in handling local issues. However, they're still bound by the KNPA's overall policies and regulations.
So there's this balance between centralized control and decentralized operations.
Yes, and that balance is crucial to understanding how law enforcement works in South Korea. Think of it like a network rather than a rigid pyramid. The KNPA provides the framework, the standards, the overarching strategy, while local agencies have the flexibility to adapt to their specific communities and challenges.
Okay, that makes sense. So within the KMPA itself, how is the work divided?
Well, the KNPA is divided into a number of bureaus, each with its own specialized area of focus.
And this is where things get really interesting. Just reading through the list of bureaus, it's clear how diverse the KNPA's responsibilities are. You've got the Community Safety Bureau, which sounds pretty self-explanatory.
Right. They're focused on things like crime prevention, community outreach, and building positive relationships between the police and the public.
Then you have the Investigation Bureau, which I'm guessing is all about solving crimes.
Exactly. They handle a wide range of investigations from homicides and robberies to cybercrime and white-collar crime.
And then there's the Traffic Bureau, which I'm sure is kept busy in a country with as many cars as South Korea.
Oh, absolutely. They're responsible for traffic enforcement, accident investigations, and promoting road safety.
Okay, so we've got community safety investigations and traffic. What else is there?
Well, there's the Public Security Bureau, which deals with things like crowd control, public order, and responding to large-scale events.
I imagine they'd be involved in handling protests or any kind of civil unrest.
That's right. They're also responsible for protecting critical infrastructure in government buildings.
Okay, then we have the Intelligence Bureau. Now, this sounds a bit more secretive.
Yes, they gather and analyze intelligence related to crime and security threats.
Yeah.
They play a key role in preventing terrorism and other serious crimes.
So they're like the KNPA's eyes and ears, constantly monitoring potential threats.
Precisely. And then there's the National Security Bureau, which focuses on threats to national security, both internal and external.
So things like espionage, sabotage, and any activities that could undermine the South Korean government.
Exactly. And they work closely with other intelligence agencies and security forces to protect the country from these threats.
And last but not least, we have the Foreign Affairs Bureau. Now, this one seems a bit unexpected. What do they do?
Well, they're responsible for international cooperation, liaising with law enforcement agencies in other countries, and handling extradition requests.
So they're the ones building relationships with police forces around the world and collaborating on transnational crime fighting.
That's right. And they also play a role in training and capacity building for police forces in developing countries.
Wow, so the KMPA really has its fingers in a lot of pies.
They do. And that just goes to show how complex and multifaceted modern law enforcement has become. It's not just about catching criminals anymore. It's about preventing crime, protecting the public, safeguarding national security, and cooperating with partners around the world.
It's a lot to juggle, but it sounds like the KNPA is structured in a way that allows them to handle this wide range of responsibilities.
It does. And to get an even deeper understanding of how they operate, let's take a closer look at some of their specialized units, which I know you are particularly interested in.
Okay, let's do it. Okay, so let's talk about those specialized units. The one that really stood out to me was the tourist police.
Yeah.
It just seems like such a uniquely Korean concept.
It is. It really is. And it really speaks to just how important tourism is to South Korea's economy
Right.
and their global image.
Right.
They recognize that a negative experience that a tourist has can have these ripple effects.
Yeah.
So they've really invested in this unit to make sure that visitors feel safe and welcomed.
I'm curious, what do they do? I mean, beyond the obvious, like helping tourists who are lost or if they're victims of a crime.
Well, their duties are actually surprisingly diverse.
Right.
They patrol tourist hotspots, obviously provide language assistance, offer cultural guidance to help prevent misunderstandings,
Oh, okay.
and even run these educational campaigns to raise awareness about common tourist scams
Oh, wow.
or cultural sensitivities.
So it's like a blend of law enforcement and hospitality and cultural ambassadorship all in one.
That's a great way to put it, yeah.
That's pretty cool. It's a really proactive approach to tourism, and I mean, it makes sense considering how much South Korea invests in promoting itself as a travel destination.
Right. Now, in contrast to this very modern, forward-facing unit, there's another one that you mentioned that's no longer in operation.
Right.
The compulsory service police.
Yeah, the riot police that was made up of conscripts.
Yeah.
This one seems like it's straight out of a history book.
Well, it was definitely a product of a very different time
Yeah.
when South Korea was facing significant internal and external threats. It was formed in 1967 during the Cold War, and their primary purpose was to maintain order and suppressing protests, often with a very heavy hand.
So it was less about community engagement and more about crowd control.
Yeah. unfortunately, that's the case.
Mm.
As South Korea transitioned to democracy, the compulsory service police became increasingly controversial. There were accusations of human rights abuses and excessive force and a culture of impunity within the unit.
I can see how that would clash with the values of a modern democratic society.
Exactly. And as public pressure mounted, the decision was made to disband the unit in 2013.
Wow.
It was a really significant step toward police reform and aligning law enforcement practices with democratic principles.
So in a way, the dismantling of the compulsory service police was a sign of progress, a recognition that those old methods were no longer acceptable.
Precisely. It's a reminder that even these long-standing institutions can and should change in response to evolving societal values and expectations.
Okay, now I have to ask about the Special Operations Unit, the SOU.
Yeah,
These are the guys that we picture when we think of elite police units, right?
absolutely. They are the KNPA's highly trained rapid response force. They are equipped to handle the most dangerous situations like hostage rescues, counterterrorism operations, high-risk arrests, you name it.
So they're the ones that get called in when things get really serious.
Exactly. And they go through rigorous selection and training, including specialized weapons training, tactical driving, close quarters combat, and even psychological conditioning to prepare them for those high-stress environments.
Wow, it sounds incredibly intense.
It is. They have
Yeah.
to be ready to face any threat, and they operate with a high degree of autonomy and discretion.
Thinking about these specialized units and the equipment that they use, it's a good reminder that the KNPA has a pretty diverse arsenal at its disposal.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating to see how that equipment reflects the evolving needs and priorities of law enforcement in South Korea.
Like, for example, we mentioned earlier the plan to replace their fleet of police buses with hydrogen-powered ones.
Right, and that's a perfect example of how the KNPA is incorporating sustainable technology into its operations. South Korea is a leader in this field, and it makes sense that they would extend that commitment to their police force.
It's definitely a forward-thinking approach, and it shows that they're not just focused on crime fighting, but also on environmental responsibility.
Exactly. And then, of course, you have the more traditional vehicles like the Hyundai Elantra and Sonata patrol cars, which are a familiar sight on South Korean roads.
Right, and motorcycles, which are probably essential for navigating those crowded city streets.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And let's not forget the helicopters, which provide aerial surveillance and support during major incidents or operations.
Okay, so we've got ground vehicles, air support. What about weaponry?
Well, standard issue for uniformed officers is the revolver.
Hmm.
But the SOU, as you might imagine, has access to a much wider range of firearms.
Okay.
Semi-automatic pistols, submachine guns, rifles, and even more specialized weaponry for specific situations.
That makes sense. They need to be prepared for anything.
Exactly. And their training ensures they know how to use those weapons safely and effectively.
Now, this might seem like a bit of a jump, but thinking about the training and the expertise required for these specialized units makes me wonder about the overall training structure within the KNPA.
That's a great point. The KNPA takes training very seriously.
Yeah.
They have this multi-tiered system that includes basic training for all recruits, specialized training for specific roles and units, and ongoing professional development throughout an officer's career.
Okay, so tell me more about that. Where do new recruits go for their initial training?
The primary institution for basic training is the Central Police Academy. It's a very rigorous program that covers everything from law enforcement fundamentals to physical fitness, firearms proficiency, and even ethics and human rights.
So they're not just learning how to arrest people, they're learning about their responsibilities as public servants.
Exactly. And they're instilled with the KNPA's core values of professionalism, integrity, and service to the community.
Now, what about officers who want to specialize in certain areas like investigations or cybercrime?
Well, for that, they have the Police Investigation Academy, which offers advanced training in a variety of specialized fields. They have courses on everything from homicide investigations and forensic science to cybercrime analysis and financial fraud investigation.
So they're constantly updating their skills and knowledge to keep up with the evolving nature of crime.
Exactly. And then at the very top tier, you have the Korean National Police University.
Okay, so this is like the Ivy League of police academies.
You could say that it's a highly selective institution that offers a 4-year undergraduate program leading to a Bachelor of Arts in Police Science.
So this is for officers who are looking to take on leadership roles within the KNPA.
Precisely. Graduates of the police university typically go on to hold senior positions
Yeah.
in various departments and bureaus.
Wow, it's quite a comprehensive training system. It shows a real commitment to developing a highly skilled and professional police force.
It does. And it's a recognition that modern law enforcement requires a combination of technical expertise, tactical proficiency, and a very strong ethical foundation.
Now, thinking about the future of the KNPA, I'm curious about some of the challenges and debates surrounding their work.
It's a great segue because we've touched on the evolution of the KNPA, but understanding the challenges that they face today is key to grasping the future of law enforcement in South Korea.
So what are some of those key issues?
Well, one of the most significant is this ongoing debate about the autonomous police system, which we touched on earlier. It's a proposed reform that would give local governments more control over their police forces.
Okay, so instead of having this centralized structure where everything flows from the KNPA headquarters, they're considering giving more power to local authorities.
Exactly. And it's a really complex issue with strong arguments on both sides.
I'm all ears. Let's break it down. Okay, so let's talk about this autonomous police system. It sounds like a pretty radical shift from the way things are currently structured.
It would be a significant change, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Proponents argue that it would make policing more responsive to local needs and concerns. They believe that local governments are better equipped to understand the specific challenges facing their communities and to develop those tailored solutions.
So it's about bringing policing closer to the people, making it more accountable to the communities it serves.
Exactly. They also argue that it would foster greater innovation in policing. Local authorities could experiment with different approaches and share best practices, leading to a more dynamic and effective law enforcement landscape.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about the potential downsides? I imagine there are concerns about fragmentation and a lack of consistency if every local government is doing its own thing.
Those are valid concerns, yeah. Opponents worry that decentralization would lead to this patchwork of different policing practices across the country,
Yeah.
potentially creating confusion and undermining national standards.
So you could have one city with a very strict approach to law enforcement and then a neighboring city with a more lenient approach,
Exactly.
leading to inconsistencies and even jurisdictional disputes.
Exactly. There are also concerns about the potential for political interference in local police forces.
Right.
If local governments have more control over policing, they might be tempted to use that power for political gain or to target certain groups.
Right, that's a real danger. And I imagine it would be difficult to maintain consistent training standards and ensure that officers across the country are operating under the same ethical guidelines.
Those are all legitimate concerns, and it's a debate that's likely to continue for some time. There's no easy answer, and any reforms will need to be very carefully considered to find that right balance between local autonomy and national consistency.
It's definitely a complex issue with no clear-cut solution. Now, beyond this debate about structural reform, are there other pressing challenges that are facing the KNPA?
Of course. One that is top of mind for law enforcement agencies worldwide is the evolving nature of cybercrime.
Oh, yeah.
It's a constantly shifting landscape, and the KMPA is working hard to stay ahead of the curve.
Makes sense. The digital world is like the Wild West these days, with criminals finding new ways to exploit technology for their own gain.
Exactly. And it's not just about having the latest technology. It's about having the expertise to investigate these crimes, to track down perpetrators who are often operating across borders, and to gather evidence that can hold up in court.
Right. It's a whole new set of skills and challenges for law enforcement. So how is the KNPA adapting to this digital age of crime?
Well, they've been investing heavily in their cybercrime investigation capabilities. They've established specialized units within the Investigation Bureau that focus specifically on cybercrime, and they've been recruiting and training officers with expertise in digital forensics network analysis and online investigations.
So they're building up their cyber SWAT team.
Exactly. And they're also working closely with international partners to share information and coordinate efforts to combat transnational cybercrime.
Right.
Because these criminals often operate across borders.
Right.
It's essential to have that strong international cooperation.
And I imagine they're working with the private sector as well, considering how much of the cybercrime is happening on platforms run by tech companies.
Absolutely. They've been building relationships with tech companies and cybersecurity firms to share information and collaborate on investigations. It's a recognition that they can't fight this battle alone.
Right? It takes a village to catch a cybercriminal.
Ah.
Now, beyond cybercrime, are there other transnational threats that are keeping the KNPA busy?
Of course. drug trafficking, human trafficking, terrorism.
Mm-hmm.
All of these require a global perspective.
Uh-huh.
And the KNPA is actively involved in regional and global initiatives to combat these threats.
So they're working with other countries to share intelligence coordinate operations and build capacity in weaker states that might be vulnerable to these transnational criminal networks.
Precisely. And they're also participating in international organizations like Interpol, which provides a platform for law enforcement agencies around the world to collaborate and share information.
It's fascinating to see how the KMPA has evolved from its roots in the Korean independence movement to become this modern, sophisticated force that's tackling not only domestic crime, but also playing a role on the global stage.
It really is remarkable, and it's a testament to their adaptability, their commitment to professionalism, and their recognition that security in the 21st century requires a global perspective.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. From the KNPA's historical roots to its complex organizational structure,
Yeah.
its specialized units, its equipment, and the challenges that it faces today. I have to say I'm pretty impressed with what I've learned.
I agree. The KNPA is a fascinating organization, one that reflects the unique history, culture, and values of South Korea.
Before we wrap things up, I want to leave our listener with a few things to ponder. We talked about how the KNPA is adapting to this digital age, but what about the rise of artificial intelligence? How might AI shape the future of law enforcement in South Korea?
That's a great question. AI has the potential to revolutionize everything from crime prediction and facial recognition to evidence analysis and even the deployment of autonomous robots for certain law enforcement tasks.
It's both exciting and a little bit unnerving to think about those possibilities.
Yeah.
And it raises these important questions about ethics, privacy, and the balance between security and civil liberties.
Absolutely. These are questions that societies around the world are going to have to grapple with as AI becomes more integrated into law enforcement.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. I hope you found it as informative and thought-provoking as I did.
I did as well. It's been a pleasure exploring the world of the KNPA with you.
And to our listener, if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, I encourage you to delve even deeper into this world. There's always more to discover. Happy diving.